All right, we are back with Gareth Soloway of In the Money Stocks, and Gareth is the chief market strategist for In the Money Stocks. He's going to give us a little insight today on Bitcoin, what we can expect, where it's going, up or down, bull or bear. Gareth, what do you got?
Hey there, Greg. Great to be here today, and just awesome to give people updates on the cryptocurrency situation. So basically, what we're seeing here is the market doing exactly what we talked about last. I think it was about a week and a half ago. I was on with you. We talked about the drop to 30,000 on Bitcoin, and then I was expecting a move up over the next couple months to about the 48 to 50,000 range, and then another dip down, maybe as low as 20,000 on Bitcoin. And I'm still in that camp. And if I show you the chart here, basically it's following exactly what you would expect. Again, here you can see that former head and shoulder pattern right here, shoulder, head, and shoulder. It broke down, went right to target here, the 200 moving average as well. And basically since then, you've been digesting the move. My guess is you're going to start to trend higher back to this neckline here. And that's what we call a retrace to the scene of the crime situation, where you had the breakdown level, which was a break of that line, which was the catalyst for the big drop to 30,000. You usually go back and retest that. So again, we're looking at 48,000-ish, maybe as high as 50,000 on the upside. Now, it's important to understand that this is just an interim bounce before another leg lower. And my guess is you'll see the rally in Bitcoin that takes you there, partially an offshoot of what's going on with the meme stocks right now. So if you look at AMC, it's absolutely remarkable. Bed Bath Beyond, BlackBerry, all these names are ripping higher. My thought is that you're going to see money eventually get taken in terms of profits from these stocks at some point, right? People are going to say, okay, listen, I'm up 500% on AMC. I'm going to take some off the table. And they're going to say, okay, well, I want to be invested. Where do I put it? And my guess is they're going to say, okay, well, Bitcoin's down significantly. Let me find some or buy some Bitcoin for a potential move up. And that'll be part of the catalyst to back to 48,000 before the next wave of selling comes in. So it's fascinating. I mean, there's so many moving pieces when it comes to the market. And we always talk about, well, it's crypto, it's stocks, it's commodities, but they're really intertwined. I mean, if you think about it, money flow is just constantly going back and forth. And you could argue that the fall in Bitcoin had people taking money out of Bitcoin, and then that could be the reason why these meme stocks have shot up, because that money's now flowing into those names.
Yeah, it's really interesting and fascinating. And what's really funny is one of the things you said last time, before we could really get to a bottom, before we could really start to really trend up again, was that people need to get absolutely sick and tired of Bitcoin. And we're kind of in that mode right now where it's wiggling sideways, where people are just totally frustrated.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely frustrated. But they're not panicking yet. I think that's the key, is that the bottom will be seen when people are like, oh my goodness, is Bitcoin actually going to survive? It was the same thing after 2017. I mean, I still remember even in early 2020, where there were many people coming on CNBC and these other media outlets and talking, do we think Bitcoin will actually survive? And then obviously we know what happened here. So I do think that that's key. I do think that, again, you'll see that resurgence, which will get people bullish again, and then the next flush, which will finally take us down to that kind of capitulation level where the all-out panic is there and longs on a longer-term buy basis can be taken.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And there's been a couple of things out there where, a lot of people feel like maybe 20 is about as low as it could possibly go, just because given the history of Bitcoin, it's never broken below its previous cycle high in the history of Bitcoin. So that's an interesting metric. And you wonder, do those rules even apply right now, given what you just said, with the money inflow, outflow, with now more institutional involvement in the game? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I still think, things like that are important. I mean, if I look at charts in the past, that's how I analyze charts going forward, is I notice double tops, double bottoms, things that repeat over and over again in a chart. So I think you have to take that seriously. I also think that if we do get down to 20,000, there will be a fair amount of institutional activity in terms of buying it up there. I think, again, as we make a more of a switch to kind of alternate energy, solar and all those type of things, it won't be taboo anymore to be more in Bitcoin, which I think really just over the last 3 months or so, even 2 months since Elon Musk brought that up, is that really made these corporations that were thinking about adding it to their balance sheet step back and say, okay, let's see if we can say, okay, if they're mining based off renewables, we'll do it. Until that happens, we're going to sit on the sidelines. But I do think there'll be a price where corporations really do get interested and buy it more and more.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting to me is what's that price and what is the price for the corporation that's looking to place treasuries, and what's that number for the institutional investor, the hedge funds that are working for yield?
Yep. Yeah, and that's the big question, right? Does it stop at 20,000? My general assessment is if everyone's talking about 20,000, it'll pierce it by, let's say, 3 or 4,000 to make even the people that were calling for 20,000 panic a little bit. I see that in my own trading is where I look at a high pivot and I'll say I'm going to short this here or I'm going to buy this down here, and they'll even make me say, okay, like question myself. This was the technical level, it's below it now, and then all of a sudden it does bounce above and you get the bigger run. So it's kind of flushing out the stops there. There's always stop orders that are placed at these key levels and they'll usually pierce it. The question is how much. And honestly, it's tough to know, especially with Bitcoin. Big orders can have such an outsized effect on the price on Bitcoin.
Yeah, we're seeing flows in and out, so people are setting the deck and getting the
Yeah.
board ready for the next moves, and that's what's interesting too, because a lot of people are looking at those outflows saying, well, that's just people taking Bitcoin off the table and they're going to leave it there, which could be all part of the game, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm sure it's a big part of the game. So, and it'll be so interesting to see too, where you have China with the digital yuan now. They're really trying to clamp down on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And I think I said this last time, but it's important for investors to know that China doesn't hate Bitcoin or really dislike any of these cryptocurrencies. Their goal here is to make the digital yuan the reserve currency of the world. So that's why they have to clamp down on these other cryptos, because they don't want those to take over the spot of digital reserve currency as the dollar slowly gets printed into oblivion. So that's kind of going to be an interesting thing to monitor. How does the Chinese government bring that digital yuan into the system over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of maybe seeing if it can be a digital reserve currency.
Yeah, and now we're seeing news every day that more and more countries are all now exploring and putting, their own initiatives in place to create their own digital currencies. So
Yep.
I see all of that as a win for Bitcoin because, again, the narrative is Bitcoin is a store of value. It's an asset. It's not a currency. They don't want it to be viewed as a currency because then it is a threat, right? So
Right.
I think the digital currencies of central banks around the world are a positive, and I think regulation is a positive for Bitcoin. What do you think?
I think it's 100% true. So the more you go to this digitalized system, the more access everyone is going to have towards the Bitcoin, plan, and that's going to absolutely increase its popularity over time. The only thing you would say is, well, at some point, if the governments do view it as a detriment, do they try to outlaw it? And I don't think they will. I mean, you always have smaller countries that can do that, but in terms of the U.S., as more corporations adopt it and start putting it on their balance sheet, the government will be pressured through, through deposits and contributions to political people. They'll be more and more pressured to leave it as is and just make it more into a digital gold. And that's always how I viewed Bitcoin. For me, I always have to have a theory or a thesis behind why I'm investing in something. And when I got into Bitcoin years ago, the idea was, well, I see before my eyes the government printing so much money, so much debt. The Federal Reserve has been doing quantitative easing since 2009 and hasn't stopped yet. How do I protect the dollars that I'm earning where they store the value? The current dollar from 10 years ago, for instance, is still worth that same amount. And that's where Bitcoin comes in and other cryptocurrencies. So super key to understand why you're buying it. That's why certain things like AMC or Dogecoin don't make as much sense to me, because I don't have that hardcore thesis behind it. It's just a momentum trade. And listen, momentum trades can work beautifully and they have worked beautifully, but for my brain, I just can't get it around doing that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really fascinating. And so when I look at price targets down the road of 100, 300, 500K, it's really interesting to me who's a buyer at those levels.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the question, right? So, I mean, if you see 100,000 on Bitcoin, I mean, is someone going to be paying up for that? And the answer is probably, because if it gets to 100,000, you got to assume it's being adopted by more and more countries, more and more corporations, and at that point, even if they're only buying, a half a Bitcoin or whatever, you still have to figure that they still need to be exposed. I mean, because the same thing could be said with stocks, right? I mean, stocks are generally viewed as being overvalued right now, but plenty of funds are buying because they have to. their investors are demanding that they have exposure to the market. And the same thing will happen with Bitcoin, where investors will say, listen, you got to have 10% in Bitcoin, 10% in Ether, and the funds will have to go out and buy these things because of that.
Hmm. Yeah, and we have the history, to show for it as well. I mean, it's a different game now at the prices that we're at now versus the last, 5, 10 years, 20,000 and down. When you start getting into 60 to 100,000 range, that's a different animal, different contemplation, and different metrics along the way.
Yeah, it is. The beautiful thing about Bitcoin and somewhat with stocks today is that you can buy partial, right? You could buy zero point 0.1 Bitcoin or even less than that, 0.0001 Bitcoin. So even the average investor can still get exposure even at a price point of 100,000 or so. And the nice thing about it with stocks today on certain platforms, you can do the same thing. You could buy partial shares. So it really opens it up to a wider audience that maybe in the past wouldn't have been able to afford one share of Google at $2,000 and change, or Amazon and so forth.
Yeah, which is, I think, largely what drove the price of Bitcoin recently because of the leverage. Some platforms allowing 100 to 1 on, you could go in with $100, $1,000, and that adds up over time in a market like Bitcoin.
It sure does. And I know that leverage is out there. And in my head, I'm just like thinking to myself, when Bitcoin crashed from 50,000 to 30,000 in a day, whoever was leveraged at that amount, I mean, the broker, the crypto broker must have taken a hit on that. If, that type of leverage and that fall, holy cow, what a hit that would have been. Hopefully it was small, and you don't want it to be small investors, but for the broker, hopefully it wasn't a big whale, because that's where you get into some major issues.
Yeah. So what we're looking at now then is still, you don't see anything recently that has changed the thought that we're going to look at maybe a bull trap to 48, then we've got to pare down a little bit before we can, continue this cycle that we're in, bull, bear, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so let's go over the chart, and I want to, this will give me a good opportunity to kind of explain how things will change, because it's so funny. As soon as I post up, on Twitter, for instance, hey, this is my thoughts on Bitcoin. Within an hour, someone says, hey, has that changed? Is that still your outlook? Next day, 20 people, 50 people, and so just to be clear, if you're looking at this Bitcoin chart here, so I'm still looking for a bounce back to this range, but you do have the 20 moving average here sloping down. That will be resistance. So as you get into the 20 moving average, assuming you move up, we have to watch to see, does price just stall? Does it have a small pullback and then break through? How does it perform? All right. So the way I would say, so everyone wants to know, well, if how do you know if something in your projections changes? And the answer is going to be this. If you get up to this neckline, and the 50 MA will slope into that, and you get above and you stay above. So basically, let's say we get above 50,000 and we stay there for a week, hovering between 50 and 52,000. Then you could arguably say, okay, we've now gotten above that 50,000 top line. This may now go back to the $65,000 highs. All right. On the same reverse side, you have a very defined level at 30,000. So let's say you get up to the 20 moving average in the low 40s here, and then you start tanking. If you take out the 30,000 low, then that upside target is now null and void, and you should look for a move down to about the 20,000. I think you'll bounce around 25,000 as well. But again, the beautiful thing about technicals on a chart is that it's not really a gray area. It's not like, well, do I want to change my mind? How do I feel? What's my gut telling me? It's very defined in terms of technical levels, which give you very good kind of bases for understanding if your thesis still is in play or not. So again, just to keep in mind, watch the 20 MA, then watch this neckline. And again, if we get above and stay above, then it could go back to the 65,000 or higher level. All right.
For
and again,
people that
remember,
can't see, where is that neckline? What is that at?
so the neckline right now, it's upsloping, so it's adjusting, but right now it's right around 48,000 to 49,000. My
Okay.
guess is it could be close to 50 by the time Bitcoin moves up to that level. But again, if it pierces 50,000 for a day, that doesn't include a breakout, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have to actually hold above it for a couple days. I will obviously keep you guys posted. I'm sure I'll come back on with you, Greg, many times over the next couple months, and we can talk about it and update. And the same thing on the downside. As long as you don't take out 30,000, the case for a bounce up to the 48, 50,000 level is still fully intact. If you take out 30,000, that negates that low pivot, and it now can fall as low as 20,000.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's funny you talk about, when you post something and you do something like this, like the next day or 4 hours later, people are like, what about now? And it's
Yeah.
like, Bitcoin and cryptos move fast. The altcoins really do move minute to minute, but this could take a while. So, back to the chart real quick, the where we're at right now, we're trending into a flag formation where a lot of people are saying, as we're coming to a point in this flag the next couple of days through this consolidation, that something has to break, in the next day or two, up or down. Is that the case, or can you just hover right here, consolidate for a month?
Yeah, I do think a move is coming. The question is it going to be that up move or is it going to go down and retest? And you can see there's a little bit of kind of a wedge pattern right here. So
Mm-hmm.
at some point, these two lines are going to meet. They meet right over here, which will be just a couple, maybe 2 to 3 days away. So I think you'll either going to get a move up, which is my guess, you'll break to the upside in the short term, or you'll break to the downside, in which case we have to start watching that 30,000 level. Absolutely. So I do expect some sort of definitive signal over the next 3 trading days for where this thing is going to go. And again, just remember, just watch your low here and then watch this upper level right here. And that'll really give you a firm basis of the view that I have. And again, of course, I'll update everyone if anything were to change there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Gareth, I appreciate you coming back and updating everybody. It's awesome as always. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too.